There's a little quick check just off the highway, not too far from my house. In my tiny, barely populated town, it's the only place that stays open all night. If I push the speed limit a little, I can make it there in about 25 minutes, which, for anyone who actually lives in a city, probably sounds like it's right around the corner. My sleep schedule is a complete mess, so I've found myself at that store more times than I'd ever admit out loud. I like to think I look pretty ordinary, the kind of person you forget the second you look away. But at this point, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if the night shift employees recognize me on sight. This particular story happened just last week, so it is still fresh enough in my mind to make my stomach twist just thinking about it. It was a little past midnight, and I was deep into a coding session on my laptop. My best work always seems to happen in that weird zone between late evening and the early hours of the morning. I was completely locked in, everything just clicking into place. The only downside to working that late is how suddenly the hunger hits you. One moment you're perfectly fine, and the next, you feel like you haven't eaten in days. That's what finally made me shut my laptop, grab my keys, and head out the door around 2 a.m. The road to the Quick Shack is technically a highway, but in reality, it's more like a long, winding back. At that hour, it's practically deserted. The drive over was completely silent, just me and the darkness. I pulled into the empty parking lot, welcomed inside and ordered a sandwich from the counter. While I waited, I started wandering through the aisles. The combination of too much caffeine and my ADHD means I can never stand still for long. Pacing around helps keep my thoughts from spinning out of control. And that's when I saw something really strange. At the very back of the store, sitting on the floor right in front of one of the refrigerator doors, was a person. At first, my brain just didn't process what I was looking at. I walked past the aisle, stopped, and then slowly turned my head back just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. Nope. Someone was really sitting there, crisscross applesauce on the cold tile, staring into a cooler like it held the secrets of the universe. From where I was standing, all I could really see was a brown coat and a pair of worn-out jeans. My curiosity got the best of me. I just had to see his face. So I started circling around a few aisles, planning to just get a quick peek and then turn away before he noticed me. I tried my best to look like I was just checking out the snacks, but apparently I wasn't nearly as subtle as I thought. The moment I turned the corner of the aisle, his head snapped directly toward me. I don't mean he gradually turned it. Was instant. The suddenness of it made me freeze, like a kid who just got caught doing something they shouldn't. And the second I saw his face, I realized that nothing about this guy was normal. Sitting on the floor was weird enough, but his expression was so much worse. His eyes were stretched unnaturally wide, and his lower lip was shaking nonstop, almost like he was freezing cold. Except it wasn't cold in the store. It was actually pretty warm, and he was even wearing a thick jacket. His posture looked all twisted, as if he was forcing his body into a shape it wasn't meant to hold. But the worst thing, the absolute worst part, was the way he stared at me. It wasn't an angry look. He wasn't smiling. It was just a hollow, lifeless stare that made him look more like a mannequin than a real person. After what felt like several long minutes but was probably only a few seconds, I finally broke eye contact and hurried down another aisle. All I wanted was my food so I could get home. I went back to the counter, but my sandwich still wasn't ready. I waited there, my anxieties growing with every second that passed, keeping one eye on the corner where the guy had been. I half expected him to just appear at any moment, but he didn't. When my order was finally ready, I grabbed it and got out of there as fast as I could. I thought that was the end of it. A weird, creepy encounter, but nothing more. But as I turned onto the road leading back home, something moved in my peripheral vision. I glanced back toward the store and saw someone sprinting, full speed, across the parking lot. Even from a distance, the brown coat told me exactly who it was. As I pulled onto the empty highway, I watched him jump into an old pickup truck and speed off after me. My mind started flooding with questions about what he was doing, what he was planning, but I had absolutely zero interest in finding out. I just wanted to make it home safely. The store lights faded behind me, and soon I was back in the middle of that empty darkness. I'm used to being the only car on the road at that hour, so when a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, I noticed immediately. When I realized they were getting closer and fast, my first thought was that it was a police officer. I slowed down a bit, waiting to see the flashing red and blue lights, but when the vehicle got close enough for me to see it clearly, I recognized it. It was him. Tisame beat-up truck from the parking lot. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I stomped on the gas pedal, pushing my speed back up. But the truck stayed right on my tail, honking its horn and flashing its high beams at me. I started to panic. I had no idea what to do. Should I pull over? Should I try to outrun him? My car is just a regular sedan, small but quick enough that I figured I might stand a chance. The faster I went, the more terrified I became. It felt like danger was closing in on me with every single second. When my speedometer hit 100 miles per hour, every instinct in my body was screaming that I was just moments away from losing control of the car. I switched into the right lane, hoping he would just get the hint and pass me. He didn't. He swerved right behind me, staying directly on my bumper. I eased off the gas, thinking maybe I could just pull onto the shoulder of the road. But the second I started to slow down, he slammed right into the back of my car. The impact sent a jolt through the whole car, and my hands started shaking uncontrollably as I gripped the steering wheel. That's when it really hit me. He wasn't just following me. He was actively trying to hurt me. Before he had a chance to ram me again, I jerked my wheel hard to the left and slammed on my brakes. It was a pure reflex. His truck shot past me, fishtailed wildly across the road, spun around several times, and then flew off the highway into a dark field. I didn't wait around to see what happened next. I just kept driving, flooring it until I reached my house. I was shaking so hard it was difficult to even get my keys into the lock on my front door. Once I was safely inside, I immediately called the police and told them everything that had just happened. I couldn't give them an exact location of where he went off the road, but they took my report anyway. I'm sure the QuickCheck's security cameras must have caught his truck in the parking lot, so I'm just hoping that's enough for them to eventually find him. A week has passed since that night, and I haven't heard any updates. My car only took a small hit, so it's fixable. But as for why that man came after me that night, I don't think I'll ever have an answer, and I truly pray that I never, ever cross paths with him again. Thanks for listening to my story. Stay safe out there, and remember to always trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. The routes for that job were long and completely unpredictable. So Monique's EDB behind the wheel for 12 hours straight, often in the dark, delivering to far-flung parts of the Southwest that most companies wanted nothing to do with. The money made the effort worthwhile, and since I grew up in a family that loved long road trips, the endless highways didn't bother me much. One night, I was finishing the last stretch of a haul from Phoenix to Lovington. It was about 1 a.m., and I was weaving through a lonely section of Route 82, just beyond the edges of Lincoln National Forest in southern New Mexico. If you've never driven through there after sunset, it's tough to explain how empty it feels. The road is thin, barely lit, and you're lucky if you pass another car twice an hour. But Route 82 is also the only realistic way to cut through that part of the state. Any detour the GPS offers will throw an extra 2 hours onto the drive, looping you north through small towns like So if you're traveling across that area at night, you don't have many choices. I had a true crime podcast playing when I rounded a bend and spotted a red hatchback pulled onto the gravel shoulder. Its hazard lights blinked in the dark. I naturally slowed a bit. As my headlights washed over the car, I saw a woman standing beside it, holding her phone in the air like she was trying to capture even a tiny bit of reception. My first instinct was to keep going. I wasn't cold-hearted, but I wasn't clueless. Either strange situations in isolated places can turn dangerous fast. Still, I started picturing what I would want someone to do if it were my girlfriend or my sister stuck out there. Plus, primera wa, essent helpless. Tucked under my steering column was a Glock 43. I didn't exactly run that by my boss, but considering where we delivered, keeping it close felt like basic common sense. I rolled down my passenger window just a little. The woman rushed over and tried the door handle immediately, which was locked. She told me she needed a ride to the nearest gas station and said her car had died. She also mentioned she couldn't reach anyone on her phone. Her voice sounded shaky either from nerves or something else. I hesitated. Something about the whole thing felt strange, but knowing I had a way to protect myself tipped the decision. I unlocked the door. She climbed in fast and muttered a slurred, "Thank you so much," barely making eye contact. The way her words blended together made me think she had been drinking. I asked her normal questions before pulling away, whether the engine had made any weird sounds, whether she'd hit anything, all that. But she kept brushing my questions aside and insisting I just start driving. The more she dodged, the more uneasy I felt. I was moments away from telling her to get out when I glanced at her car again. A man emerged from behind it like he had been hiding the whole time. My heart jumped. I snapped my eyes forward and instantly spotted another person standing in the road about 50 feet ahead. He held something long in his hands, a pipe, maybe a bat. He started walking toward us. Every warning signal in my head went off at once. I slammed my foot onto the pedal. The woman spun around to look out the back window and began yelling. Then she leaned over and dug into her purse with urgent, frantic movements. I had a pretty good guess about what she was trying to grab. Before things could go any further, I shouted at her to stop and pulled out my gun knot, pointing it at her, just resting it on the steering wheel so she could see it clearly. She froze. Whatever she'd been searching for stayed in her bag, and for the first time since she got in the truck, she stopped talking. Luckily, we were less than half an hour away from Artesia. When we reached a gas station and I saw 2 big rigs in the lot, I pulled in. I told her to get out. She refused and made up some excuse I've already forgotten. I leaned across her, opened the door myself, and practically pushed her out. She stumbled and hit the pavement, yelling something I couldn't even understand. One of the truckers jogged toward us, and I could practically hear the assumptions forming in his head. From his perspective, he'd just seen me shove a woman out of my vehicle. I didn't want to spend a single second trying to explain the situation to a stranger. I shouted a warning about her intentions, but that was all I was willing to do. Then I sped out of the lot and didn't look back. I drove to another station and began fueling up. Once the pump clicked off, I walked around to check the passenger seat. Wedged between the cushions was a burner phone battery and an unopened pack of zip ties. I didn't want to think about what they planned to use them for. I tossed everything in the trash and got back on the road. I never reported the incident neither to the police nor to my employer. Not because it wasn't serious, but because explaining why I was armed or why I had forcibly removed someone from my vehicle would have opened doors I didn't want to walk through. You can probably figure out the rest. What I can say for sure is that having that firearm with me that night might have been the reason I made it home. This happened about 3 years ago. During a cross-country trip my husband and I were taking from Utah to Georgia. The route wasn't the shortest one, but it passed through some places he really wanted to see. The downside was that we had to travel through long, quiet stretches of highway with almost nothing around. The worst section was the part of western Kansas along U.S. route. For nearly 100 miles of farmland and empty horizon. We'd been driving all day, and I'd fallen asleep around sunset. I can fall asleep anywhere in a moving car, so I was completely out for hours. Around 10 p.m., I woke up to the car slowing down. My husband had pulled into a tiny gas station off the highway. He said he needed snacks and fuel. I figured it was my last chance for a real bathroom break, so I got out and headed inside. I didn't take my purse or phone, no reason to, since I planned to be back in less than a minute. The cashier was an older man who barely reacted when I walked past. The bathrooms were tucked down a narrow hallway. When I pushed open the women's restroom door, I nearly collided with a woman walking out of a stall. She looked unusual. Her gray hair was wild and clumped together like it hadn't been washed in ages. She wore flimsy foam flip-flops that made soft slapping sounds with each step. But the thing that stood out the most was her coat, thick, puffy, and colored in purple and green. It would have made sense in the middle of winter, but we were in Kansas during summer. It had to be around 80 degrees. She held a tied plastic grocery bag, and when our eyes met, she didn't react the way someone normally does. She didn't step aside or mutter an apology. She just stared intently, almost as if she expected me to say something very specific. I wasn't really sure what she expected from me. I just gave her a polite nod and tried to walk around her, thinking she'd move aside and that would be the end of it. But she didn't step away, not even a little. I figured she'd eventually go about her business and I could continue with mine. Except she didn't. Instead, she turned and followed me, stopping near the sink area. But she didn't wash her hands, check the mirror, or do anything a person normally does. She just stood there, arms hanging at her sides, like she was silently waiting for something from me. That uneasy feeling in my stomach grew stronger, so I went straight into the closest stall and locked the door. The moment I sat down, I regretted not bringing my phone. If something went wrong, I had no way to contact my husband, and the more I thought about it, the more worried I became. I waited for what felt like several minutes. Eventually, I heard her flip-flops slide across the floor toward the exit, followed by the bathroom door opening and slamming shut. I stayed completely still, giving it extra time just to be sure. That's when I noticed it breathing. Not mine. Someone else's. It hit me all at once. She had faked leaving. She must have pushed the door open and shut it to trick me. But she was still in the room, probably waiting near the door where I couldn't see her. I didn't move a muscle. I tried to calm my breathing so she wouldn't hear me. I kept thinking how ridiculous it was that I'd left my phone in the car. After what felt like forever, the door opened and closed again. The breathing stopped, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I still wasn't sure, so I waited another half-minute. Just when I reached for the lock, I heard a sharp gasp, like someone had been holding their breath the whole time. Then the door opened and closed once more. That's when my nerves really kicked in. She had pretended to leave, not once, but twice. I didn't know what she wanted, but it was obvious she was up to something. Maybe she had already left, or maybe she was trying the same trick yet again. Eventually, I couldn't handle the suspense anymore. I unlocked the stall and stepped out, expecting her to be standing right there. But the bathroom was empty. I washed my hands quickly and stepped into the store, unsure if she was hiding nearby. When I reached the main area, a large man was checking out at the counter. I lingered by a display until he finished and walked toward the exit. I followed at a safe distance, using him as cover. If she was waiting outside, at least I wouldn't be alone. Part of me felt like I was overreacting till I actually stepped outside. She was there. Again, standing near the entrance, staring straight at me. She held something in her hand that I couldn't quite identify. It might have been a knife, but I wasn't completely certain. The way she held it and the way she crouched slightly made it look like she was preparing to rush toward me. I braced myself to shout or run, but instead, she turned quickly and hurried around the side of the building. I bolted to the car and jumped in. My husband looked confused, asking what took me so long. I told him I'd explain once we were back on the road. He didn't push for details. He simply drove off. When we pulled away, I glanced back and saw the woman standing at the edge of the building watching our car. The sight made my whole body tense. I explained everything to my husband, and he was understandably upset that I hadn't taken my phone with me. But after that, we agreed to put it behind us and try to enjoy the rest of our day. From that moment on, though, I stopped using roadside restrooms altogether, and honestly, I'm perfectly fine with that. This next part happened in 2020, when I was 24 and working for a small logistics company. My job was to transport car parts between cities in the Midwest. Most of the time it was simple work, long drives, steady pay, and no one checking on me constantly. But that job is the reason I refused to stop at a highway rest area after dark. It was mid-January, freezing cold, the kind of night where even the dashboard lights feel too bright. I was traveling along the I-80 toward Davenport with a delivery. I had left around 8 p.m., and by 10:30, I was in the middle of nowhere. With nothing but the hum of the tires and the occasional semi in the opposite lane, I started feeling extremely tired, fighting to keep my eyes open. So when I saw a sign for a rest area, I decided to pull off for a minute to stretch and grab a drink. The place was almost completely empty. It's a few dim lamps, a small brick building, and one old white van parked far at the end of the lot. I parked under a light, locked my truck, and went inside. The men's room smelled faintly of cleaning supplies, and the heater was rattling strangely. As I washed my face, I thought I heard the door open. I spun around, but no one was there. I shrugged it off and finished up. But when I stepped outside, something immediately felt wrong. The van's headlights were now on. The engine wasn't running, and I hadn't heard anything earlier. That bad feeling hit me right away. I hurried into my truck, started the engine, and pulled toward the exit. As I reached the road, the van's lights shut off again. Maybe someone inside had bumped a switch, I thought. But that didn't calm me. Once I was back on the highway, I checked my mirrors every few seconds. 5 minutes passed before I spotted headlights closing in behind me. It was the van. It sped up, fast riding close behind me. I was already doing about 75, but it stayed right on my bumper. Then it switched lanes, pulled up beside me, and matched my speed. The driver lowered his window halfway. I could barely see him, just at a dark shape and maybe a cap. He motioned for me to lower my window and pointed at my truck bed like something was wrong. For a split second, I wondered if he was warning me about a loose strap. But there was nothing in the bed. It was empty. That's when I realized something was definitely off. I pretended not to notice him, but he started honking and drifting dangerously close. I moved slightly to keep room between us. He then sped ahead, cut in front of me, and for a moment I thought he was going to stop in the lane. Instead, he swerved onto the shoulder and came to a complete stop. My heart was pounding. I stayed in the fast lane and increased my speed. A few moments later, the van was behind me again. Sometimes it would disappear far back, then suddenly rush forward close to my tailgate. I knew I needed to get somewhere busy. The next exit had a truck stop. I pulled in, parking under the brightest lights near the diesel pumps. There were several semis and I saw a few drivers inside the diner. The van didn't turn in immediately. After about 2 minutes, it slowly entered the lot. I stepped out and headed straight into the diner. As soon as I walked in, the bell chimed and the woman behind the counter looked up. I quickly explained that a van had been following me. She called over a trucker sitting nearby, an older guy with a flannel shirt and a gray beard. He walked outside with me. We saw the van idling at the far end of the lot, facing my truck. "That's not a good sign," he muttered, telling me to go back inside. He marched straight toward the van. I couldn't hear what he said, but suddenly the van reversed, swung around, and sped out of the lot, heading back to the highway. When the trucker returned, he shook his head. He said there were 2 people inside, both wearing hoodies, both staring ahead without saying anything. I stayed in the diner for nearly an hour before finishing my drive, constantly checking my mirrors the rest of the way. When I finally reached Davenport, I parked under bright lights and checked my truck. Everything was fine, except for 2 smudges on the tailgate, like someone had tried to open it. I quit that job a few months later. Now, when I travel long distances at night, I make sure I'm fully prepared: fuel, snacks, everything. And I only stop at busy, open locations, because I am certain that if I had rolled down my window or pulled over when they wanted me to, I wouldn't be here telling the story.